All right,
Isaac.
so this is a New Holland 77 baler. I just bought it September of 2024 in Zimmerman, Minnesota. I'm attached to a baler like this because the first time I ever drove a tractor was pulling a baler identical to this one. When I was a kid in like 1954, Minnesota mining was moving from downtown St. Paul into Maplewood for more space, and they bought 140 acres. And they started building one building at a time, and the rest of the land they rented out for farmland. And my dad rented that farmland for a few years, 54, 55, 56, in that area. And one night after supper, I don't know the exact reason, whether it was going to rain or it was the last load, he had one wagon load to bale out there. So he loaded me and the tractor, one of the farmhauls, either an H or an M, an empty wagon, and we drove from the farm, which is the Ramsey County Workhouse, and went about 2 miles north of the north side of the big highway to 3M property, and baled our field. There was no all the hired men were gone for the day. It was just me or him. I was probably 8 years old. And so the baler has a motor, which means the tractor can idle. So Grandpa could put me on the tractor in first gear and just idle the tractor, and all I had to do was steer. And the motor was going wide open and doing all the power for the baler. It really worked out well.
And Grandpa would be on the bale wagon.
Grandpa would be on the
bales.
wagon stacking the bales. If I got into any trouble, the tractor was going so slow he could run from the wagon to the tractor to push in the clutch and get it in the neutral for me. If it was an M, I wouldn't have been big enough to get the clutch in to get it in neutral. So that's these balers at that period always had a motor on because PTOs were in their infancy, and the PTO and the ground transmission always were operated by the same clutch. So if you were coming to a bunch and the baler was going to plug up and you pushed in the clutch to stop the forward moving, you would stop forward moving, but the PTO would stop and the baler would stop too, which means then you'd be plugged up for sure. So when you got a separate motor, it really worked good. Later on, when you pushed in the foot clutch on the tractor, the PTO did not stop. So that was taken care of. But this period of the 50s, the PTOs were not independent. So that's why they had motors on. They were almost all Wisconsin motors. One reason, because they were air cooled. If it had a radiator, all the chaff would have plugged up the radiator and the water would have boiled over. It wouldn't work to have a radiator in this dirty of a dusty spot. Also, this is a V4 instead of an inline 4. An inline would have been a long engine, so the engine would have hung out here, or the shaft would have been hanging out that way. It's much simpler to mount a boxy engine. So this 20 horse Wisconsin fit the bill for combines and balers of all brands. And Brady got me a pamphlet on this. The pamphlet was dated in 1949, so they were at least sometime around that, and that's when these balers were started to be made, 1949. This baler's a 1954 model. The guy I bought it from, he's deceased. His wife was selling his estate. He was a 31-year implement mechanic, and he serviced balers as a profession. So he had this baler for 15 years, and he's gone through it and made sure that everything works and it's in good repair. So I got the baler I wanted, and I got one that's field ready. There's nothing to do to, you can go out and go baling with it today because he's got it working great. The original first balers were stationary. Then the next step was they put a pickup and you could drive, but then it was a manual wire tie knotter. You had one operator would sit on this side on a seat coming out from the baler, and another operator would sit on the other side from a seat. The wire was long strips. They'd pull the wire out, stick it through, and then the bale would keep moving, and then the guy on the other side would stick it back again, and the guy on this side would tie it together. So that was hand tie balers, and I can remember, must have been really little, 5 or 4 years old, having a case baler that was a hand tie baler, and Case was one of the first balers with a pickup. And then the next step was to have automatic tie for the wire baler. And we had, and the popular baler for that was Minneapolis Moline, which was made on Lake Street, which was where all the Minneapolis Moline things were made, Lake Street in Minneapolis. But it had a knot such that it had waste on the end, and the waste wire was clipped off. And it had a pan under the knotter to collect these waste pieces. But they would still somehow would end up in the hay. Cow would eat the little wire piece and get hardware disease, is what we call. Any metal that a cow eats will not pass through it. It'll just collect in one of her stomach until it punches the stomach and she gets sick. So farmers didn't want anything to do with that. Anytime a cow got sick, they said, well, it must be my wire baler. So then New Holland comes out, well, we'll solve that. We'll take the knotter off the grain binder and use that same knotter, and we'll make twine tie baler. So according to Brady's pamphlet, this was the largest selling baler in the world at the time it was made, because it had it was a well-built baler, and it was twine tie. And that's what the farmer wanted at that time. I think by habit, the farmer was used to the strings being on the side, because it had to be on side for the wire tie person. And, you know, people don't like change. They farmed all their life with the wire on the side. They want their twine. So they put the twine on the side. But when you're on the wagon, it's hard and it's dangerous to reach over and try to get your hand in here to grab the twine to get it off the chute. So everybody used the bale hook. And you didn't hold it here, you held it here, so you had control. So the bale would come up and you'd hit it like that, and when it got up to here, you'd drag it out, drop on the wagon, and then you'd tip it over so you could grab the strings and carry it to the back of the wagon. So this was standard equipment. And of course, kids did a lot of baling, and they soon were instructed that if you're careless, the wagon's going to run over it and you're going to get a flat tire. And I know brothers that horsed around, and one brother got the bale hook in his hand, but that's all learning experience. So that's the New Holland 77 baler. And the other thing why this meant a lot. So as a kid, like Henry's size, who's a 7th grader, I would run this every summer, probably 8 years, all summer long, all for first crop, second crop, third crop, all the straw. I was the tractor driver because I wasn't big enough to carry the bale. They were big bales. Normal bales, 50 pounds, but these are bigger than a modern bale. These were probably 65 pounds. So it took a serious kid. So I was driving it all summer, and that motor, the governor's real sensitive. Every time the plunger goes in, it goes wide open, go room, and then it idles. Room, idle, room, idle. So all summer long for 8 years, I had the sound in it just ingrained. Baler's just a part of me. It's just, oh, you know, the shear bolts, and I mean, they're just, if you aren't careful and you put too much hay in, then the shear bolt here's gonna break, you know. I know right where it is and what to go, how to do it, and so even though these Wisconsin engines are fantastic, they were really hard to start, mainly because they would get hot and the valves would warp a little bit and compression would go down, and when there's poor compression, it's just hard to start an engine. So my dad, he had a aftermarket electric motor you put on the end to start. And the gentleman I bought it from, he put a hydraulic motor on the end for his homemade starter. Okay.